Hello everybody, welcome to your channel Full Stack Developer, the channel that will boost your productivity as a full stack developer. As Elon Musk said, automate wherever possible. In this video, we are going to talk about API automation with Nswag. If you already worked with Swashbuckle or Autorest, think of Nswag as the combination of both. So in two words, Nswag provides tools to generate OpenAPI specification from existing ASP.NET Web API controllers and client code from this OpenAPI specification. For example, you can create a C# client or a Typescript client directly generated from the specification. To give a quick example of how we can benefit from this tool, I have here a server communicating with the front end, and I need to communicate with the new API gateway to fetch new data that I want to compute and send it back to my front. Here is when Nswag becomes handy. Using the OpenAPI specification from the API of the gateway, I can generate a .NET HTTP client and all the interfaces that come with it. And then from my API, I can generate a TypeScript HTTP client that communicates directly with my server. All of this without writing a single line of code. And we can automate this process using multiple options. For example, we can do it with MS Build target using the Nswag Nugget or using Azure Functions in the cloud. Finally, we can use it also with an npm package called Nswag. So as a Mac user, I will use the last option. So let's see this in action. Let's open the terminal. And then I'm going to create a web API, which will be named my API. Here in the API, I'm going to create a React application that will be my front end. Let's now open the project with code. And here I'm going to create a terminal. Let's now go to our browser and let's assume that this API is our API gateway that we want to communicate with. So here, when we click to the Swagger GSM file, we have the OpenAPI specification. So I'm gonna copy this, and then in our VS Code, I'm gonna create a folder here called spec, and inside of it I'm going to create a file called OpenAPI gateway specification JSON. And here what we are going to do is to generate our HTTP client to communicate with this gateway API. So first of all, I will install the Nswag npm model globally so I can use it. Let's now use the Nswag CLI. So here I'm going to say that I want a C# client from an OpenAPI specification. As an input, I'm going to give it the specification. So I'm going to pass the specification file, and then I'm going to say that my class name will be generated API gateway, for example, client, and then the namespace will be API gateway, and lastly I'm going to specify the output file that will be gateway client.cs. As you see here, my client was created, and then I can use it directly in my controllers, or I can inject it in my services. So here the new soften JSON library is not installed. They can install it directly here. This is done, and the new soften JS is now installed. Let's now go to my controllers, and then I'm going just to delete this controller create a controller that would be called activities controller, and here let's now delete all of this because we don't need them. I will say to my server that I want an HTTP client to be injected, and then here in the controller I will get this HTTP client, and then here I'm going just to call our client, which is called generated gateway API client here. Let's import the namespace. Here it will wait for the base URL to be displayed. So here I'm going just to copy this and then remove all the absolute URI, and then I will inject our HTTP client, and here I'm going to return my activities. So here my activities will return an e-collection of activity. So let's just copy the type here. And I will say that this is asynchronous, and here I'm gonna wait, and then I'm going to launch the server. So the server is launched in this port. Of course, here we have our Swagger of the server, and then if we call the activities here, as you see we have all the activities. So our HTTP client is successfully added to the project, and we can communicate with our API gateway as fast as possible and as simply as possible. Of course, you can inject this client using dependency injection. You can use it in several ways. So let's now go to the client side. I'm going to copy my server specification, and now let's go to the client app. Here in the server I'm going to create a folder called API, for example, and then a file called API spec.json. So my spec is here. Now let's generate our Typescript HTTP client to communicate with our API that communicates with API gateway. So let's use the Nswag CLI, and then say I'm going to use an open API specification to generate a Typescript client. Here in the input I'm going to give it. Here in the input I'm going to give him this file, and the output will be the same, but generated API.ts. So the generated HTTP client is here, as you see, and we can use it on the application. Let's now go to our application.ts6, and now let's remove all of this code that we are not going to use, and then I'm going to delete this use state and these dependencies. Here I'm going to create a function called getActivities, which is a nothing function. Let's now use our client, which is called client like this. So here I'm going to say new client, and then I'm going to call our client and ask for the function get activities, and I will put these activities in a state called activities state. This state is not imported. Let's now have the type, the return the type here. Of course, I'm going to import the type from the generated API, and then I'm going to set the activities in the state. I will now call the use effect to call my function that fetches the activities. And I will say to my hook to execute this only on the first render of the application. Let's now use the activities on the view. Let's open JSX brackets and then map over these activities. Of course, I'm going to pass a key, so the activities be unique. And then here I'm going to say that I want the activity title, and then I will say if the activity is completed, I will write completed, otherwise write not completed. Here's the code. Let's save it, and then I'm going to build this code. So here, let's go to client app, then build the code. The build files will be in the dist folder here. Let's copy this folder and then paste it on the root folder here. It's just a workaround to say that I want my server to serve these static files, and then in the program.cs here I will say that I want my application to use static files like this. Let's now launch our server and then go to index HTML, which is our front end, and here as you see our activities are all loaded on the front end. And now if I go to the network application, we can see that the activities query is executed here, and if we pass the network to slow 3G, refresh this page, we can see that we don't have anything on the beginning, and now after a while all the activities are loaded on the front end. So I hope that you liked this video. See you in the next ones. Ciao.